In South Sudan, the government and opposition are accusing each other of violating a ceasefire hours after it began. The army says 15 civilians were killed north of the capital, Juba. It blamed rebels. Fighting also took place in a town west of the capital, with both sides blaming the other for starting it. A peace deal signed this week was supposed to go into effect at midnight Friday. Tens of thousands have been killed in the years-long conflict. Millions are on the verge of famine. For more on South Sudan, I'm joined by Joshua Meservey. He's a senior research fellow for Africa and Middle Eastern Affairs at the Heritage Foundation here in Washington. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us. We talked before you came on, and you said this is not a surprise. So this is a pattern that we've been seeing here in this area.
It is, unfortunately, a tragic pattern. You lose count, actually, of how many of these agreements have been signed and then violated, some within hours even of their signing. By my count, this is the 12th or 13th such agreement. So very much part of a pattern that points to a fundamental problem, which is the parties involved in this negotiation are just not committed to peace.
So how do we break this pattern? Where do we go from here?
You have to bring pressure against the warring parties and really serious, sustained international pressure. And that's been a problem so far. Part of the issue we have here is that the warring parties just don't believe the international community anymore when it threatens and when it shakes their finger and says, this time you better behave, because there hasn't been substantive consequences for constant violations. So that has to change. You have to personally make these the primary violators of the agreement really feel the effects of continuing this terrible war.
Speaking of pressure, the United Nations has said, they had until the end of June to find a political agreement, or they will implement sanctions. So are these violations serious enough to trigger those sanctions, do you think?
Well, yeah, probably. We don't quite know. Right now, it's a he said, she said situation, as you mentioned in your run-up. I suspect when there's an investigation, if there's an investigation, that it will find that probably there are violations on both sides. That's been pretty much the pattern. And yes, that should trigger reaction from the UN. It should trigger reaction from IGAD, from the US, from the Troika group of countries that have been trying to bring peace to the world's newest country.
And one reason for this agreement was to let humanitarian aid into this area. We talked about famine in the run-up to this interview. And so how much more desperate can this situation get, given what's happened?
Unbelievably, it can get even more desperate, which is, as I say, hard to believe because it is so tragic and awful. Famine has just narrowly been averted. Widespread famine has just been narrowly averted previously because of this conflict. Now we're potentially staring down the barrel of another famine. If these warring parties do not allow humanitarian access, or if they just continue to pillage and destroy this country, yeah, it could actually get worse. We could see even more displacement. About a third, it varies on who you talk to, but potentially a third of the population is displaced already.
It's more pressure in a region that doesn't need it, right?
No.
Okay, Joshua Meservey with the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.